Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Boy, am I excited for our podcast today. Before I introduce our guest, here is a quote just for this episode. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung, my good friend, your good friend, our guest today, Dr. David Yerkes, is back to talk all things leadership, culture, holistic, proactive, health conscientiousness. I'm sure some level of philosophy and psychology. If you haven't listened to our episode with his business partner, Miss Dr. Huff, you better. I was about to say something stupid about huffing and puffing and blowing the house down. Oh, I guess I just did. You better listen to that episode. It's powerful, powerful partnership. And thanks for coming back today on the show.
Awesome.
I'm
Yeah, thanks.
excited to talk about some of your thoughts. But yeah, what do you think about that quote?
Well, I think it's a great quote if you're willing to kind of self-reflect a little bit. I think that's what the quote implies. You have to be willing to reflect a little bit on what does annoy or irritate you in order to realize. I think it does reveal something about ourselves. The things that annoy us reveals something about ourselves. So I think it's a very true quote. And I think it requires, most of the time we go through life not really being either conscious or willing to reflect upon those things. But if you're willing to and you're conscious of it, then I think you can learn a lot about yourself by that.
What do you think about this quote? No man is free who cannot control himself.
Mm.
Pythagoras.
Yeah, I think that is similar to the discipline equals freedom concept, which I struggled with for a little bit to try to understand for a few years once I first heard that concept. And but I think it goes back to self-discipline. And when you are living life intentionally, with self-discipline, because that's what it takes to live life intentionally, you it's really hard to articulate until you experience it. Almost it you you realize the freedom of really kind of choosing your path instead of being almost like a slave and a reactionary type of situation all the time. So what ends up happening a lot of times, I think, in life, especially as we are busy in our lives, we end up almost just living in reaction mode and crisis mode all the time. But if you discipline yourself and you really prioritize and live intentionally, then it really just kind of frees you up to do the things that you value. It allows you to live in alignment with your values, I guess, which is freedom. You're taking back control of your own life.
I have this picture that I want to show you. You know, like the two paths.
Mm-hmm.
This is life, this line, it's just one line. Then conflict happens. And then I look at like what you just said, reactive is one path. And then there's another path. Maybe it wouldn't even be left or right. You know, like the two forks in the road.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a reactive path and there's a proactive path. And the question, I'm just a visual. And the question is, do I get back to the straight line to go forward again?
Mm.
Yeah, I'm sorry for anyone listening to this. It's not can't see the video, which you should be able to see if you go to YouTube, type in this episode's name. Should be on there by the time this is on audio. But like we have this straight line of life, and there's constant divots because conflict,
Mm-hmm.
things out of our control that pop up. How we relate to those conflicts is reactive or proactive, or some form of both in between. I'm curious what comes to mind, what you think about that.
Well, I think our natural tendency is to be reactive, right? It takes intention or discipline, right? Going back to that quote, it takes intention to be proactive. And so I think, you do have to be reactive at times. I mean, you can't anticipate everything. So you have to learn how to react in those moments. But I think that also, if you can think ahead and be disciplined, there's a lot of things that we can anticipate. There's a lot of things that we know are coming, or that we know we should do, things that ways that we should discipline ourselves, and that we kind of don't do. So I think if we can discipline ourselves to do that, then we have less, then spend less time in the reactive mode. Again, you can't avoid it completely, but we can minimize that. Now,
Like, time is traveling no matter what.
right.
How we occupy our space will be relative to our awareness and a bunch of other things. What are those elements?
Yes. Yeah. I think the getting back on in the direction you're intending to go, the line that you had drawn, that's the goal, right? To stay on that path of going in the direction you'd like to go. And either one you can get back on that line with either method. I mean, being reactive, the goal is still to get back heading in the right direction. The problem is it's a more, I guess maybe you could draw it like as a more steep deviation from the desired path, versus being proactive doesn't deviate you as far. You have to take that on earlier and more often, maybe, but it doesn't deviate you as far from the path. Whereas being reactive requires a lot more time and energy to get you back in the right direction, maybe.
Oh, and I wonder how, what if 10 years goes by and it was 10 years of reactivity?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is just the chaotic nature of it, right? You have less control over your destiny that way, right? I think that living in that chaos uh, is not ideal for producing the best results.
What do you think of this quote? From the errors of others, a wise man corrects his own. Publius Syrus.
Yeah, that's
I can't even say his name.
it's uncommon.
Publius.
There's another quote very similar to that. It says something like, you know, a foolish man doesn't learn from his own errors, and a smart person learns from the errors of others, or learns from their own mistakes, and a really wise person learns from the mistakes of others. I butchered that quote, but that's the gist of it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's unique, and it's rare to be somebody. But I think, again, that's another thing you kind of have to be intentional about. You can't just go through life in reactive mode and learn from the mistakes of others. You have to actively seek that out through learning and personal development to be able to recognize that. Even, I think most people can learn from their own mistakes. Some people more quickly than others. I think learning from our mistakes is actually probably the most impactful form of learning. In fact, I learned that from, my scholastic, all my time in school. I started recognizing I really, when I miss a question on a test or a practice exam or something like that, it really sticks with me, because I'm, oh, okay, that's what it was. It just seems to solidify more. And I think in life, it's that way too. It's not just on exams. And so when I was going through my training, I really picked that up, but I've really seen it happen in other areas of life. So I think learning from our own mistakes is a very powerful way to learn. But I think if we can learn from others, that's even obviously even better, because then you can avoid those mistakes, you know, especially, hopefully you can avoid the really impactful mistakes and harmful mistakes.
Why
So
did you get that David Buss book about on psychology?
why did I get it?
Yeah.
I heard a quote from it and I was curious. And so I thought, well, I'm going to check into that and see, what it's about, because again, as we've talked about before, I'm really interested in psychology
Hmm.
and how our nature affects our psychology. And, and as somebody who's interested in helping people by helping move them in the right direction, it's something that I'm always pursuing. Just, and I'm interested in human beings and how we think and work too. When I was in college, I thought psychology was just a bunch of fluff and
Really?
silly. And now I can't get enough of it. Now it's one of the most interesting things in my life. So, maybe that's just maturity or whatever, but yeah, I thought, I was a science guy, real hard, hard sciences, math and biology and chemistry and stuff. So, but I've realized that, when I started getting more interested in working with people and leadership and uh, helping, trying to motivate people and move people, psychology became really interesting to me.
Hmm. Now you watched recently some shows that I was on.
Yeah, so one of the podcasts, there was an episode where the host, Brian Hess, asked you something about if you thought you were a good person. And I think your
Ah,
response, do you remember that?
if you, I'm not quite sure.
So
Yeah.
the subject was broached. I can't remember exactly the wording that was used, but your response was basically kind of like, that you didn't really think you were a good person. And if I remember correctly, it was essentially you didn't feel like you were a finished product. Essentially, you felt the need for continued personal development, and you're always working on yourself and continuing to improve. And I agree. I think that's something that we should always. It's never, the work is never done. If you feel like the work is done, then you probably have a lot more work to do, right? But there was something that I was, and that I took away from that too, is I kind of disagree with you a little bit on that. And here's why. I think, and you mentioned something about your past in that answer, and you were just kind of, you know, rolling with it, but it made me think of the quote, "We aren't what we did, we are what we continually do." And I got to thinking, oh, I was reflecting on myself. I was like, do I think I'm a good person? And
Hmm.
I do think I'm a good person. And why is that? Well, because I genuinely try to be. I try to do the right thing. I genuinely do. And you know, I heard something recently about somebody talking about the difference between your character and your persona, your public persona and your character. And your character is what you do when nobody else is around. Like, are you going to throw trash out the window when nobody's looking? That's a very simplistic example, but that's the gist of it. And I genuinely feel like in my own personal self that that's how I live my life. I try to do the right thing genuinely, regardless of who's watching. And I think Jay, you're probably the same way. Um, and so I don't know. I just had a little bit different perspective, and I was interested in diving a little deeper on that, because that was kind of what I took from that. Of, okay, do I believe I'm a finished product? Definitely not. I have tons of work to do. I make mistakes. You know, I make errors. I do things that are wrong. I hurt people unintentionally, and speak, wrong, and all these different things that I do that are not perfect, right? as a human being. But I think if anybody can be a good person, if it's possible to be a good person, I do believe that I am. And then furthermore, that belief, I believe, drives me to act upon that belief. So I am who I say I am because I do what I believe that person does. I'm not sure if I said that quite right, but our actions are controlled by our mindset. Our actions are driven. Everything we do is driven by what we believe, right? Everything, every action we take, everything we do is ultimately driven by what we believe. And if I believe that I'm a good person, that's going to influence my actions in the future as well.
I think that that's the fallacy of self-development, that we're programmed to think that.
Okay.
Because I think Stalin felt the same way. Because like, yeah, I would find it hard to believe that he woke up in the morning proud of his evil doings, but more so
Oh, he thought he was
dogmatic of
doing the
his
right.
righteousness.
Yeah, he thought he was
Yeah.
doing, or he knew he was doing wrong, but for the right reason. I think there are
Well,
people, there are a
what's the
lot of people
difference?
that, oh, I think there's a big difference. I
Not
think,
for him.
yeah.
It's in a vacuum. Well, that's where I would say that the my critics are the feedback loop for if I'm good or not, or if what I'm doing is helpful or not. It's those outside of my frame. I think we get conditioned by this. I think that a lot of people would agree with what you just said, and I believe at one time, having not, for whatever reason, challenged it at one time, I likely did too. And now I feel I look differently at that. Yeah, the belief you could. Yeah.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that? Do you believe it's possible, or do you think it's productive to believe, or is there a point in your life where you would believe that you're a good person?
I think it's almost it. I think that there's an inherent, um, it's an unreconcilable paradox that the person most clearly, my enemy, my whoever's the farthest to my left. But so here's the advice. Like, let's say we're friends. You're the least equipped to judge me on my goodness. My enemy at the farthest. Let's say that I'm at the center of this narrative. So I'm at zero, like algebraically or numerically. And then my friend is at 50. So you're at 50, positive 50. Whoever is the idea equal inversion of our friendship at negative 50 will dictate my level of goodness. And
I
a
don't
more
necessarily agree with that. And
well, of course, because that
hear
would
me out.
challenge the fabric of your psychological foundations of existence.
It's true. It's true. Well, but hear me out. Let me tell you why.
Sure.
So who probably knows you as a person of, Coke. So I'm not your mom, right? I'm not, I am,
Thanks for clarifying.
I
For the
am,
audience.
we're friends, but we're
Yeah.
friends for a reason, right? So, but also like, so there's certain, what you're saying is there's a certain amount of bias there that I'm going to be biased positively toward your goodness, if you will. Now, but the inverse of that is this person that is the exact opposite of me on the other end of the spectrum, also may or may not know you, as I don't know you necessarily as well as some people may, but may not know you as well as I do. They may or may not. but also they have their own personal biases. They have their own life. They're their own main character in their life. And so their view of you is also biased by their own afflictions and life experiences, etc. Right? So
Sure.
I don't think that it's necessary. I don't
Just
think
prove me
one
right.
is discounted. I don't think one is discounted, right? So they're both important. They're both views or perspectives are important.
They're not important. Well, I'm interrupting you. It's unfair.
Or well, they're both, whatever. They both
I might as well just say
may or
now
may not have meaning.
one is less important than the other, proportional to my self deceit.
You're saying for your own like viewpoint of yourself, you should be focused more on the person who is being more, say, more willing to be honest about your flaws, right?
I would argue that look at this diagram.
Mm-hmm.
For those listening, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Type in the episode. No, because we're gonna start having the videos on YouTube, so that's good.
That's great.
That would be really helpful, right? Here we have I'm the zero, so numerically I'm the zero in the middle. I'm the individual, and on the left hand side is -50, and on the right hand side is +50. My belief, my argument is based on I'm the zero in the middle. Those my critics, or those that represent criticism, deconstruction of my being, are on the left hand side of the spectrum here, representing between 0 and -50. Those on the right side of the equation that are affirming my psychological homeostasis, my being, are on the right side of the spectrum. My relationship with truth will be proportionate to, and so on the right side, how grayed in this diagram is. So if this diagram, if you're looking at it, it's all shaded in on the right hand side, meaning my focus is on what I deem positive or constructive, affirming my psychological state of being. And based on this ratio, so I'm 100% focused, let's say, on a spectrum 0 to 100% on the +50. So Dr. David fits in that +50 there. My argument is somehow I need to get this 100% focus down to 50%. Let's just use a placeholder for the bearings of this conversation. Equal distribution of awareness, attention, intentionality on both the positive, or what I consider positive, and what I consider negative, to have the highest degree of continued self-awareness, self-development, self-undoing and creation. And essentially, we get programmed, can easily be programmed to have this concept that all this on the left side of the spectrum, the 0 to -50, is absolutely meaningless and completely a self-projection of those that are outside of us. So you could make the argument, hey, those people, they have their own biases as well as I. Okay, yeah, we're on an equal playing field. Everyone does.
Mm-hmm.
What about my relation to their relation? So that's the argument I'm trying to make, to undo some of the dogma and then ironic anti-self-development that comes with self-development. Right. This idea that, almost like it's everything starts to become in a vacuum. Some of the, so that's kind of like this diagram. I'm the 0, and I'm going to be inherently more focused on justifying myself. So I'm looking towards the positive. who affirms me, who helps me maintain my subconscious, um, my subconscious homeostasis or balance of whoever I have to be to burden the suffering that comes with me being me based on the work, my life. There's this pull to look at the positive. It's like until I can look at the negative equally, I don't even know what my limits are as a person. And I damn well I'm not going to convince myself that I'm good, because good or bad is it's like a set of probabilities based on what I can handle and then what circumstances are before me. There's some quote that I used to that I really like. It's like, I'll have to look it up, but I have to be able to love my enemies and hate my friends.
Yes.
Something to that effect. So
Right.
I would like your thoughts on this diagram here: the 0 to plus 50, the 0 to negative 50, and the disequilibrium of the two. I've never drawn this like this, by the way. This is the power of disagreement. Because, by the way, if you didn't come on here and now you're, by the way, you're not plus 50 anymore. You came on here in my house and you started disagreeing with me. So David went from plus 10 friend to negative 10 friend in this context. And now I've just drawn this argument that isn't dogma. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not. I'm trying to figure this out.
Right. So to me, it sounds like basically the default situation is that you are surrounded by more people that by nature agree with you, see you in a positive light, because that's how human beings behave, right? You're naturally going to be surrounded by more people that see you in a positive light. So that skews that graph to the positive. Not only that, you tend to be, we are our own, again, main character in our own life. So we tend
and
to.
let's add the block button.
Yeah. Now the block button definitely, turns off those other things too. Now, and I agree with the premise of being able to, it's good to be able to.
I just don't know what the value of believing I'm a good person is, because I much prefer to believe I'm dangerous. Like, I am freaking dangerous. I'm a wild lion. I'm a wildebeest.
I think
I have
we're
to
all
figure
dangerous.
out
Yeah.
how to play with the other children. I have to figure out how to not get kicked out of the sandbox.
I
I
think
have
the
to
positive.
figure out.
I think the positive is, there's a lot of people that don't have a good opinion of themselves, and it's very, it's defeating for them and the people around them. So I think it's good to have, like everything else, a balance of that, right? A good balance, because if you are so far that you believe you're such a good person that you're a narcissist or whatever, that you can do no wrong, then obviously that's not healthy, and that's not good for you or the people around you or the people you lead. But I think, yeah, and then also as leader, and we've talked about this before, being open to feedback, particularly negative feedback, because subordinates tend to be, for obvious reasons, tend to be less eager to share that type of feedback. So I think it's good, to your point, to try to balance that out, right? To try to balance all the positive feedback and all the positive reinforcement with
I have another diagram for you.
with being open to negative reinforcement. Okay. Yep.
When if I am in a state of oppression, I'm a victim. Let's say I'm quite literally a victim and psychically a victim. My belief may be a precursor to the action necessary to reorient myself, to take action despite my precondition or the preconditions, despite my environment. Once I get power again, or maybe for the first time. Now I'm the victor. I have a proclivity to be the oppressor, the bully. That's where I need unbelief. Like it's so contextual and nuanced. There are people that are listening to this right now that quite literally have no maybe access to food and water, or they're at their last month's rent in their account. Right. I mean, their state of psychical potential relative to things out of their control, conflict, right? Interpersonal and
survival level.
Let's take, and then add education into it. If they haven't had the opportunity to be taught or read or learn language, they may not even know what the hell I'm saying right now. And it may be just exactly what they need to hear to recognize that like any of the value of this conversation. So like there's a very real nuance here about where someone that's listening is at in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
If I'm in a position of power, I have more control over the ecosystem that I'm in. What got me there ain't gonna bring me farther than this. Like I need unbelief. Right. Right. It's just on a spectrum or so. I'm trying. These are like rough drafts of some bigger core issues like, that questions I'm trying to answer with the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
In the corporate environment.
If I'm understanding this correctly, almost like the mindset and habits and even person that took you from A to B you might have to completely reinvent that to go from B to C.
And I'm not going to be able to do it alone when I'm in power, because if I can't do it with others, then I am on the spectrum of psychopathy because of power. So like, here's a mindset. I look at that as lie set. Certain lies have utility. Like, here's an example of a lie that has utility. Someone knocks on your door, you open the door, you're home alone, and they have a knife in their hand and a grin, and they say, "Are you home alone?" Yeah, so there you have yes, I'm home alone. Stabs you in the throat. No, I'm not. There are 7 men with AR-15s.
Right.
So the mindset, like, what is that? I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's like, what exactly does that mean? I'm going to set my mind to believe something that may be partially true. Well, to what end? For what cause? If I'm in a position of weakness, an inability to act based on prior outcomes, prior consequences met with interaction, I may have to convince myself of something that's a half truth to get engine revving again, to get the, like, I look at perspectives like gas in a car. I need gasoline to fuel the car. Mindset has diminishing returns. Just like if I put too much gas in the car and it floods the engine, that's maybe not be the best analogy because I don't know anything about cars. So I think I'm taking that analogy too far. That's good. That'll really show that I don't know what I'm talking about. Kind of level out that, right?
Well, maybe we could talk about like a lawnmower engine where you prime it too much.
Help me out here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I'm trying to go with that is there's diminishing returns to the stories that I tell myself because they're contextually relevant. So if I convince myself that belief is everything and that a certain type of person or a certain type of behaviorism is not relevant to me period. Heart, right? And this, what's going to happen is as I gain power, things are going to happen in a vacuum. And I'm going to stop being able to hear the necessary criticism to burden power. And so to be the victim that becomes the victor, that mindset, that series of lies, half truths may be necessary to get me into action and motion. Once I have a position to actually, where people are looking to me as a power source, I have to unlearn that and be be able to, essentially, an easier way to say it would be, there, I don't see what's the value of the hater outside of language. If I need to not, like, if I have limited power and I'm a victim, and I feel as a victim, I've been victimized, I lack resources, I lack control, the degree by which I'm going to be able to handle my critics is nil. It'll be proportional to my you have to be a saint. You have to be a saint. You have to be transcendent psychologically to handle criticism when you have nothing, right? You're no one and you're nothing. Well, once you become someone and everything to people, if you can't handle criticism, you're going to be a monster.
I agree.
That's like the basis of my thesis here.
But hear me out on this. So I believe that comes from true confidence, and confidence as a human being comes, well, one of the ways, there's several different ways, and I'm not going to complain, or I'm not going to claim to be a psychological expert on confidence, but I have explored this a bit. I believe that it comes from being the person that we tell ourselves that we are. So I'm talking about being able to take criticism. If you are truly trying to do the right thing and open to personal development and growth, we'll say growth as a person, but you are not the person that you pretend to be, I think you're going to lack that confidence to be able to tolerate criticism. But if you are the person that you pretend to be, or that if you're genuine, and then you will have the confidence to sustain criticism, because not all criticism is true, right? That people are projecting their own insecurities and their own.
No, so that's the fallacy again. I believe all criticism is true. It's a portal of truth. It's the truest truth.
So you're saying that even if it's maybe exaggerated, it's true in some way.
We're who we are, not just based on what we tell ourselves or we think about ourselves, but based on what culture reveals to us about ourselves
and our impact on other people. So if our impact on that person results in that criticism, then that criticism is true.
I also don't think you think that fully. I think that that's something that I would say you're based on who you, like, our interactions. You look for feedback. You look for.
Yeah. And I think I'm not saying that I don't think feedback I think if your ego is fragile, if you're not confident, then you won't be able to tolerate that feedback. And so you have to be, I feel like you have to have, this is almost the opposite of what you're saying, but I think we might be able to come to figure out an alignment.
Well, the order matters.
Yes. So I think that if you do have the confidence in who you are as a person, then I think you can tolerate that negative feedback, positive, whatever feedback it is. You can take positive feedback without becoming thinking you're a god to some degree. You can take negative feedback without, becoming devastated by it. I think if you know who you are as a person and you're confident in that and you don't have a fragile ego, then it's easier to tolerate that, because we all have an ego. We all have emotions, right? So, but I think for me at least, that in my own mind seems to benefit me whenever because I feel like that's one of the reasons why I do solicit feedback, and why I, negative and positive, or I don't even necessarily solicit positive feedback, but I believe as a leader, you should, and I've said this on your show before, cultivate an environment where all feedback is encouraged, including and particularly negative feedback, because everybody kind of can see what's going right. Everybody kind of knows what's going good. But if you can't solicit or create an environment or cultivate an environment with, negative feedback, then you're missing out on a lot. So I don't necessarily disagree with you, but
I just think your definition is missing parts of
probably
based on what you just said. It's just confidence is being the person that we tell ourselves. And I mean, if you were to finish
and acting upon it,
confidence without feedback, without a feedback loop of outcome, action, what's the utility in it outside of believing something that may or may not be true? Well, what the truth will have a relationship with how it's tested, just like, like the scientific method, observation, hypothesis, testing. I'm missing parts of it. Test.
So
new hypothesis. What's the scientific method?
So you start with a hypothesis, then you test, and you actually try to, this is very key, you try to disprove your hypothesis.
Oh, there you go. Go ahead. What's the rest?
So yeah, so then you go back to the drawing board and you continue to test until you come up with with a conclusion, essentially.
Okay, so I'm saying psychologically, we have where a human being is less prone to disprove. We're in our own head. So that part about disproving our theory, that's done by our enemies,
right?
Which are our critics. And our culture is telling us not to listen to them, to block them out, to delete their comments. Our culture is telling you what you've said today on the show, that I think that you don't believe it in fully, because you have to keep in mind the level of education you've had, how you were raised, who you were raised by. You may be bringing in all these other components that have led you to be this more patient, inquiring, curious, open person to feedback. But that's kind of where I'm going with it, is that it's not just what I believe about myself. It's about how I relate to what others believe about myself. And yes, others may have their reason for telling me that I stink. If I spend all my time breaking them down of why they're saying that versus trying to figure out what they mean, I'm not really pursuing the scientific method of being as it relates to my self-development. So that's where I'm going with it. So, it's this mixture of competence and we could say confidence, like confidence and esteem, they have a relationship of, myself outside of what it is I am in this economic system. Like when I think of esteem, self-esteem, who I am, aside from whatever it is that I do and however I'm accepted in Western culture. Or I could have huge confidence and no esteem. In fact, that likely helped me propel in Western culture because of my core competence around a labor task. Anyway, we're gonna have to do part 2 and 3 for this, because it's time to pack it in. Essentially, our goal with these episodes, Dr. David, is to dismantle all of self-help and rebuild it, put it back together like Humpty Dumpty.
I'm I'm open to exploring those ideas, because I think that that's how, again, that's how we eventually end up, if we can end up at the truth or expanding our minds, right?
I don't believe we'd be able to do this or have permission to do this if we followed some of the rhetoric that our listeners can easily be tuning into around how they need to be navigating their mindset, their belief structure as it relates to their self-development. But because I'm in control of this medium, we can talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about.
Nope.
And I hope the listeners tune in. Final thoughts.
Well, it feels, incomplete, but I think that we absolutely have to be open to, and even maybe seek out, the critics, if you will, to maintain and avoid the tendency of ourselves to over glorify who we are. So I definitely think that is, and I think the blocking function and things like that. But I also think it depends on what your struggles are, right? So if somebody is struggling with negativity, personal negativity, which some people do, that could be a whole nother episode of how do you handle that. But where you're coming from with somebody that's a leader, that's in a position of power, it is dangerous to not be aware of and not consider the critics, because those critics will keep you honest, if you will.